Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Doina Olaru, and together with my friend Brett Smith, it is our immense pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural John Taplin Memorial Lecture delivered by Professor David Hensher and postponed exactly 1 year after our planned set of activities. Before the formal introductions, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of the University of Western Australia, the Noongar people who remain the spiritual and cultural caretakers of this beautiful land and continue to practice their values, languages, beliefs, and knowledge. We honor and respect their significant role they play in our community and the inspiration they bring to our lives. It is a privilege to have today with us Professor David Hensher, founding director of the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies at the University of Sydney and fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences. Professor Hensher is a leading research pioneer who has dedicated his career to the analysis and improvement of transport infrastructure systems around the world. The innumerable list of accolades and acknowledgements include, among others, recipient of the 2009 International Association of Travel Behavior Research Achievement Award for Lifetime Activity, the 2006 and 2014 Engineers Australia Transport Medal and Professional Award for Lifelong Contribution to Transport Research, SMART 2013 Premier Award for Excellence in Supply Chain Management, the 2016 University of Sydney Vice Chancellor's Award for Outstanding Research, and more recently, the 2019 John Shaw Medal for an industry champion with a lasting contribution to Australia's roads. An outstanding scholar with more than 1,200 publications, with 2 Cambridge University books on discrete choice modeling, more than 60,000 citations, and an age index of 107, Professor Hensher is the top cited transport researcher in Australia. However, today Professor Hensher has not only kindly agreed to share from his extensive knowledge across the transport research and practice field, but also shifting back in time to impart some of the memories as a close collaborator of John Taplin 2 years after his passing. Academic Sherpa, fearless public servant, friend, cycling icon, John shaped many careers and lives. His intellectual acuity, unmatched stamina, generosity and love of knowledge remain inimitable trademarks. John greatly valued his friend from Sydney, praising him for his contributions to transport research, which he shaped completely in Australia, and encouraged all of us, students and younger colleagues, to follow the trajectory of an academic of exceptional talent and creativity, who John regarded as a hardworking, dynamic innovator with a great sense of humor. This afternoon, Professor David Hensher will provide an overview of the mobility as a service, the hype and rhetoric surrounding it, and the preconditions and challenges for its implementation. This lecture is recorded and will be followed by a Q&A short session. Ladies and gentlemen, family, colleagues, past students, friends, collaborators of John, please join me in welcoming Professor David Hensher here via Zoom from Sydney.
Thank you very much, Doana, for that introduction. It is wonderful to be able to share this podium this afternoon in memory of our great friend and colleague, Professor John Taplin. As you said, it's a year ago to the day that I was meant to be doing this talk in Perth, but of course things happened that denied that. But maybe there's an unintended positive consequence, and that is that as a result of the delay, I'm able to share with you today many of the results that have subsequently being delivered to our major research known as the Sydney Mobility as a Service trial. Now, I'm going to focus on that trial today, but I'm also going to open up the possibility through Q&A to comment on the broader agenda to do with sustainability and mobility, and in particular in the context of a post-COVID world with increasing working from home and challenges about biosecurity of various forms of transportation. But before doing that, I would also like to make a few comments about John, my great friend as well, who I've known for over 50 years, who was the chair of the board of advice of ITLS, the second board chair, and a very influential person in helping us to shape the success of my institute that now is 30 years old. And I'm also very privileged to be able to say that it was my idea that led to the establishment of the John H.E. Taplin Prize at HRF for the best paper. We will all miss John, but he does remain in our memory as a great Australian and a human being. And so I was just saying, I don't want to spend any more time on John's long career because Duane had mentioned it briefly, but I have to say, one of the great delights was the research that I did with John and with Brett Smith, where the fundamental question that John asked was, how do you ratify elasticities coming out of choice models with truly demand elasticities? And that was pioneering work that was subsequently published and has had a profound impact on the way in which people understand the value of the elasticities that you should derive from the relevant models that you choose to estimate. John was very, very clear as an economist about the meaning and interpretation of fundamental concepts in economics. And this was just one of many examples of the work he did that, in my view, was absolutely fundamental and should continue to be recognized. And I'm not aware of such high quality work in this space having been done since. So moving along, I now want to talk about mobility as a service, which is a language that has been mentioned extensively in the literature, in the grey literature, and with consultants and industry. Great excitement about a possible future whereby through digital platforms, we may have a better way in which people can be better informed about modal options and choose them in a way that is not only convenient to them, but also may, we hope, produce better outcomes in terms of the amount of money and time they have to spend in traveling. And MAS, and let me say there are as many skeptics as there are supporters, and I'm not really going to comment too much on that today, but I would like to formally define it because this is very important. That is a type of service that through a joint digital platform or channel enables users to plan, book, and pay for multiple types of mobility services. But in very simple language, it's a one-stop travel management platform, digitally unifying trip creation, purchase, and delivery. And there's been a huge amount of development, especially with app developers coming out of travel planners, to try and extend their capability to provide a digital platform through an app by which people can seek other ways in which they may travel. But most importantly, and I like to emphasize this, that as important as app development is, it is very much a necessary but far from sufficient condition for achieving what we think MAS is meant to do, and that is to provide a boundary-less modal choice complying with societal goals. And this last diagram in my slide is a reminder that as to why we want to do this, and it comes down to an opportunity to try and achieve societal goals such as reduced car use or reduced emissions that has been a challenge for many years. Whether MAS can do this is a moot question. And in fact, many of us are of the view that the MAS worshippers have focused too much on the latest app and not enough on the behavioral value adding that may or may not be possible through MAS, which I'm going to focus on today. Great technology of in order to get some further clarity, and I'm not going to dwell on this too much, we decided to come up with a definition, which we hope in time will become a benchmark definition for all those people that talk about MAS, to actually test it against the definition. And the definition has a number of key criteria built into it. It is a framework designed to deliver a portfolio of multi-mobility services, of which the user is at the center. And this is a really important point as to why we're doing this. The customer comes first, but it's a framework to achieve sustainable policy goals and objectives. And as I've said before, without that, one wonders what is the purpose. It is an integrated transport service brokered through an integrator, through a digital platform. And what's important about that digital platform, it must provide information, it must provide booking, it must provide ticketing, and it must provide payment. And that can be done through pay-as-you-go and or through a subscription plan, of which we will talk about. And the important thing about MAS is it must improve the travel experience and must align with these broad societal goals. And in the long term, we hope that it can be provided at any spatial scale, be it urban, regional, or global. So for example, when you arrive at a city in some other country which you're not familiar with, through your subscription to MAS, one would hope that you will have improved information on the mobility options that you can avail yourself of, instead of having to get thoroughly confused and lost. But I will say that MAS is not a digital version of a travel planner. Hopefully the definition will realize that. It's not a flexible transport service such as mobility on demand, which is essentially unimodal, and it's not a single transport offer such as car sharing. So moving along, and it does appear that when I click, it takes time, which is a bit annoying. I do apologize here, no idea what's going on here. I just want to mention that the car is a really important challenge in this space, especially in Australia with the dominance of the automobile. And one of the great objectives of MAS has been to disrupt the car. And if the latest fancy app is not able to do something about that through the framework in which it is connected to the broader objectives of MAS, we question the value of the exercise. And it's worth mentioning here that there will be different ways in which you can disrupt the car according to whether we are talking about short trips, medium trips, or long distance trips. And here's just some examples of the modal options that are being suggested. And please note that the car can still be in the mix through a go-get or a car next door, or a corporate purchase of a number of cars, such as electric cars in the future, to provide a flexibility that may not be appropriate if delivered only through public transport or through some of the multi-mobility modes. So MAS really should be any modal configuration, including the car, that actually can achieve the broader societal goals. Surveys, and there are many of them, and we've done them, a lot of them have been stated preference, have generally said that there is a market for MAS. These are people that we would call MAS ready, or we call multimodal public transport supporters. But clearly that's not going to work for all. There are still the technological car lovers that would not be interested. There are the anti-new mobility individuals that simply do not like using an app. And there are those that are sitting on the fence at the moment. So from the surveys, and this is just one that's very indicative, including the work that we've done in Australia and the UK, is that we think there could be up to 50% of people in a reasonably representative urban environment who will have some degree of interest to consider, if not trial through participation, a MAS product, if it appropriately has the elements they're looking for. So mobility as a service really has three major constructs. New mobility services, which are essentially some of the e-scooters, for example, I would include Uber in there. The new mobility technologies, which we briefly mentioned, and the new mobility businesses. And the business model, which I'll briefly mention at the end, is the biggest challenge we face in this space. And the real question we ask is, to what extent is MAS a commercial proposition, or simply a proposition that could have legs if it's subsidized? That's the debate about what might the business model look like, and indeed who should be responsible for delivering it. Big questions of which we don't necessarily have the answers at this stage. So to move on, now that we've given you a bit of background about mobility as a service, I'd like to share with you, and you haven't seen this before, indeed nobody has, some of the findings from the Sydney MAS trial. The first trial in Australia, and dare I say, the most transparent one in the world. We tend to find with MAS that there's so many people that claim to have done a MAS trial that so few you ever find out what happened. And the general view in the market is that if you don't know about it in detail, that means it failed. So our purpose was to set a series of objectives, which I briefly summarize here, which is focused on transparency, but to look at the appropriate mix of transport services and subscription plans versus payee for early adopters. That's an important point because we are very early in the learning curve with MAS, and who knows what it might look like in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time. It is a long journey, but we have started it. And to share the knowledge we have got from our trial with all of you, to assess the readiness of the current public and private transport mix in Sydney to support MAS, to understand uptake and willingness to pay for various components, and to what extent this influences or changes travel behaviour for those who previously were not in MAS and have now joined it. And most importantly, and I repeat this, most importantly, to document the experience and how you design, plan and undertake a MAS trial. And I would suggest that unless you've been through this process, you just don't understand the challenges and the complexity. And there is such a lot of nonsense talked about MAS as if it's such an easy concept and it's one that has legs. And the questions still remain, does it have legs? And I'm not going to suggest one way or the other today unless you get me on a particular question. We divided the project into 3 phases, pre-trial, infield and post-trial. And it's very important, without spending too much detail on the components, did you spend a lot of time designing and getting information as you onboard participants about their previous behaviours. So you have a reference point to see if MAS has made any difference in terms of things like sustainability outcomes, or even just general benefit that people have got out of it because it's more convenient. Then you undertake an in-field trial, which I'll be talking about, and then you must do a post-trial evaluation. And in the post-trial evaluation, you want to know what worked, what didn't work, what you would do differently, and indeed, does this have commercial legs, or is there a business case under certain conditions? So that's what it's about. And in broad summary, these are the key components that you should build into a trial. Really, you need the app. We developed an app working with Skedgo. It was an extension of their current app, where we allowed customers to search for services, book and pay, manage the wallet and select the bundle. We had to sign up the suppliers, and let me tell you, that is no easy thing. Many suppliers who simply don't understand MAS think it might dilute their market and express considerable skepticism as to why they should participate. At the end of the day, though, as people started to realise through our expression that if you're not in it, you won't learn, that they agreed to sign up. Opal was in there from the beginning, we thank them. Uber was very reticent in the beginning for feeling it would dilute their market, but they came on board, as did taxis, GoGet, and car sharing and thrifty car rental. E-scooters were not ready to join. In fact, it became fairly clear that many of the modal suppliers do not have platforms that are sufficiently robust that they would be willing to integrate them into a multimodal MAS environment. And also some of them had the view that if we do this, we won't have a direct connection to our customers, and we don't like that. So there's those sort of challenges. Nevertheless, they joined, the people listed joined us. And in addition, we had the participants sign up. And I should say right from the beginning that our industry partner was IAG, a huge insurance company, as you know, with over 8,000 employees in Sydney. And it was decided that we would work with their employees in this trial. And that's no reflection of the inability of us to have a broader audience. It was simply a preference of this industry partner through the trial. This, in our view, did not have any impact on the quality of the evidence. And in addition, we needed a broker. We chose the broker, or the aggregator as they're called, as the industry partner, which was IEG, which undertook the negotiations with the suppliers. We worked jointly with designing the bundles, which I want to talk about, of which were coordinated through the broker. Of course, the broker was responsible for marketing, sales, communication, and one-on-one feedback to the participants, all the things that are crucial beyond simply having a fancy app. And the project was a 12-month program with up to, depending on the plan, was to have up to 4 to 5 months in field, which was affected by COVID, as I shall show you. And then we can talk now about the way in which this project was implemented. I won't spend too much time on this, but just to show you that there was deep linking between our app and many of the suppliers. In simple terms, what that meant was, for example, if you through Trippy chose Uber, you would be sent, and even though you can book through us, you would be sent to Uber, because that's where the payments would be done, and then they would be returned to us. This, once again, is something in the long term will need to be sorted out, rather than having to have deep linking where you can have everything through the single app. It's truly fully integrated, and that's not the case at the moment. As you can see, you spend a lot of time in getting your participants and onboarding them. Many of the participants were not familiar with MAS, so we actually showed a video, a cartoon version, to make sure they understood exactly what it was. And in fact, the number of people that signed up is only a proportion of the many hundreds that we promoted the product to, both face-to-face, online, and through other mechanisms. And the sample distribution is on the right. Now, the only reason I show that is because I want to make a point that people who sign up for MAS are not just people that are already committed to public transport and rideshare. There are a lot of people there that are currently private car users, and clearly that's important because they are the people in particular that we would hope that MAS would impact in terms of reduced car use and reduced emissions, which is the main societal goal that we set ourselves in terms of the way in which we wanted MAS to deliver a good outcome. So let me now move on to the subscription bundles, which are at the center of the MAS trial, as the thing from pay-as-you-go. And you see a comment I've made here that without subscription bundles, we would argue that we have a limited specification of MAS, which is essentially a multimodal trip planning app which has vague connections, if any, to sustainability goals. I'll make the point right from the beginning that it's the bundles where the incentives reside, which can make a difference in terms of the way in which you use your cars. That is something we showed from the data and from our formal modeling. So in summary, this is a big snapshot of the bundles, of which I will talk about each one in a little bit more detail soon. Is that we started off in November 2019 with pay-as-you-go. We wanted to spend 4 to 6 weeks getting people familiar with the app and to get them onboarded, to make sure there were no glitches, they understood how things worked. And it wasn't then until December that we started to introduce bundles. But during November, we did not tell them about the bundles. We wanted them to feel fairly comfortable with the process of using an app. And you'll see we introduced monthly bundles right through to March, actually, when COVID got in the way. I'll talk about that later. And I want to go through each bundle one at a time, because one of the great contributions of this trial was the innovative way in which we incrementally introduced bundles by learning from the previous one or the accumulation of bundles. Nobody else, as far as we know, had ever done that at all. Indeed, where bundles were introduced in other countries, and we can think about WIM in Finland and Ubico in Sweden, they just threw a whole bunch of bundles out to the market. And as far as we can tell, it was a suck it and see. And today there have been very few refinements of those bundles. And we suspect this is why the whole MAS ecosystem is struggling in terms of take up. Not helped, of course, to be fair, by COVID-19. I'd like to spend a little bit of time on the first bundle, which was the December bundle, which was called 50-50. And the reason why I want to spend a little bit of time on that, then I'll speed up, is because when we started, we only had some pay-go experience and we had no knowledge of their fully detailed travel activities to the extent that we wanted when we designed this. And bearing in mind, we only had 30 participants at the time we needed to start these bundles. We could not wait until they were all signed up, which was over 100, to be able to finalize this. And a couple of points should mention here that we honestly believe that without financial incentives, we weren't quite sure what was the point of all of this, unless it was purely a convenience factor of having a single app. But we also should mention that there was a curiosity factor. When you're dealing with new products, people are not all interested in joining in to find out what it's all about. And certainly through a mass promotion, we had that element. So we had substantial financial incentives, but we didn't want to spend them all in the first round. And we decided to put a cap of $100 per participant, recognizing that with 100 participants, if they all took up certain travel options, we could blow $10,000 in bundle number one. And not that we think that would have happened, but we had to find a mechanism by which we could at least give them a decent incentive, but not blow the bank, so to speak. And so we took a couple of examples and we said, what happens if we have a 75% discount on the Opal, noting that Opal is a $50 per week cap. Beyond that, you don't pay. And with that, we said, well, that would be a maximum of $150. And if we had, for example, a subscription fee, that would give us the $50 gap. And we had decided that we would only give a $50 incentive to public transport and $50 to rideshare. Now, this is arbitrary. We had little to go on, but as we worked through the MAS experience, we realized that we had better information, but at this stage, that's the best we could go on. So we said, what about a 50% discount? That meant a lower subscription fee and still satisfied the $50 gap. So as a result of this and talking with members of the team and recognizing that this is a December period when there's less work days, there's more parties, there's more use of rideshare, less of public transport, we thought that we would start off with a not too high a subscription rate because we didn't want to scare people off too much, but we didn't know whether this was a good number or not. And that we would offer a reasonable discount on public transport, but we'd also offer a generous discount on rideshare, which we thought would be popular during the Christmas period. And this came up with a nice name called 50/50, i.e. $50 a month, 50% discount on public transport. And actually getting a nifty name was actually quite an important feature because it did appeal and generated interest. So that was the process we used in arriving at the first one. And then in the next month, based on the experience of having 1 month of the bundle, we now move into the next month, which is January. And still we have the seasonal effect to worry about, less work, more flexible non-public transport travel. But we thought we'd see what would happen if we reduce the entry barrier. In other words, let's go down from $50 to $25 a month, bearing in mind we were testing variations, which to some extent, I should add, were informed by our SP work beforehand, but not all. SP is not necessarily a good guide when it comes to the reality of designing real market products. And we also thought we'd add some more services. GoGet was listed, and we didn't offer any discounts in December, but in January we thought, especially being a holiday period with people maybe wanting to access a car if they didn't have one, we decided to offer a $20 credit plus a 20% discount for first trip results in 3 new users. Sorry, for new users. Unfortunately, only 3 people took this up. And this discount would only apply as a once-off. And so as a result of that, we came up with what's called a Saver 25, based on $25 a month, a 25% off every trip. But we changed the rideshare discount from a fixed price of $3 a ride to 15%. Now, the reason why we did that is because it turned out that $3 wasn't an attractive incentive for longer trips, only for short rideshare, but 15% could make a difference. Although we were worried that whether this might dilute the public transport market. But of course, Opal fares are a lot less than rideshare. But once again, we're testing variations in the offer to see how they might pan out in terms of interest. bearing in mind that we have already done a forecast of the amount of money we have available to provide in. The next month, which is the most exciting bundle in a way, was the Green Pass. And this was based on lessons we learned from 50/50 and Server 25. 50/50 we found was attracting public transport users, roughly those who did 8 to 10 trips a week, which sort of makes sense because it had the greater discount on the fare. Saver 25, in contrast, tended to attract people with lower public transport use, but tended to attract people that were 1 to 2 weekly use of rideshare, which once again makes sense given that that's where the greatest financial benefits are. But we saw a market gap, and that was the heavy public transport users. And given our interest in sustainability and social goals, we didn't want to lose that opportunity, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't get people moving away from public transport. Not that we thought we'd have too much of that, but nevertheless, we didn't want to take a chance. And we then decided to make public transport free and provide at the same time a high subscription rate, because we also wanted to test how sensitive people were to a higher subscription rate compared with what we'd offered previously at $50.25. So if you spend time looking at these, you'll see there's quite a lot of variation in the subscription price, in the discounts on public transport, in the discounts on rideshare, and the presence or absence of a discount, which subsequently, as we're now going to tell you, was removed on Saver 25 for GoGet because so few people took it up and we decided to drop it. And that meant that we replaced Saver 25 with what we called a Super Saver 25. And also, as a result of talking to participants throughout the trial, they found that they would prefer to have a fixed price rather than a percentage discount Uber and taxi. And this was interesting because what this then told us is that most of these people were tending to use those modes for short trips. Could be the first last mile to public transport, not necessarily, and that $3 turned out to be a better deal than 15% off a very short rideshare trip. And so we returned to $3. And that was quite an important result. And that's where we ended up with our bundles. And unfortunately, in March, when we were about to introduce what we called an emission busting challenge with an additional reward across all PayG and bundles for those who were able to reduce their car use, and I should have said that we had a tracking arrangement through the Safer Journeys program of IAG, whereby the participants provided us with their car use activity. Very important, and dare I say essential, if you're to test the veracity of MAS in terms of achieving reduced car use and reduced emissions. The good news as summarized here is this is in March, and I should say at March 21 we had to stop because of COVID, where all the IAG staff were immediately told to stop traveling and to work from home. But despite that, we had enough months in the bag to share with you the good news that there was 57% of participants had taken up a bundle. Now that's very impressive. More than half had switched out of PayG into bundles, and there had been very little return to PayG as we'd gone through the months. And what this tells us is that we were doing things right in incrementally adding bundles that were informing people about other ways in which they could participate in a multimodal experience and actually save money. This doesn't exactly tell you anything about financial savings, but this diagram does. And in a paper we've just recently published in Transportation Research Part E, using an advanced mixed logit model with correlated attributes, what's most important about this diagram, which actually is confirmed by the descriptive data, which I'm not reporting, is that this black line, which is PayG, suddenly, when there starts to be a financial saving that's going to the right of zero, you suddenly find this huge drop-off in PayG and a noticeable significant increase in bundle selection. And this clearly, if you were to aggregate the bundles, would actually show a greater increase, but it's important to observe how the growth in terms of savings is varying according to the bundle that's chosen, of which 50/50, which is the very first one we introduced, appears to be offering the greatest savings, the greatest number of people are taking that up in achieving some savings. But we would suggest that had the trial continued, we would see a greater increase in the savings and the take-up of the bundles, because we started to talk about additional financial incentives. So that's a very important result, and dare I say, it's the first time anywhere in the world that anybody has identified a relationship between MAS, bundles, and reduced car use, despite the fact that there's been some qualitative evidence, limited in the first Ubigo trial in Sweden in 2019, that suggested that there was some evidence of some reduced car use. And I'm not going to quote this, but a Minnesota Department of Transportation employee was actually delighted to finally know that there was some evidence, because many people have been saying without any proof that this is achievable. So what have we learned through the trial? It's noteworthy that every single promotion of MAS and an app in Australia, and most places, only ever talks of PayG. It is frustrating to go to webinar time and time again on intelligent mobility, on mobility sustainability on MAS, and not one mention of the role that bundles could play, or how you could achieve sustainable outcomes by having an advanced app that's only PayG. This is an important point. And we doubt that if you just stick with PayG, as convenient as it may be in the end with the rollout of some quite sophisticated apps, and I include Opal Connect, which is just wonderful, as you start adding first and last mile ride share, whether that will be enough to reduce car use and emissions. And if it doesn't, then what are we saying? MAS has produced some convenience value, but that's all. The first lesson is that bundles are tools that serve a goal, and this is not the case for PayG as far as we can tell, except if the goal is convenience. So it needs to be clarified. When you are undertaking MAS, you need to determine what is the goal. It can vary from profitable to behavioural change to customer retention, or a combination. Could there be a challenge with differences between government and the private sector interests? We don't see any profitability prospects at this stage, and venture capital is keeping some of the unimodal options afloat. For how long? Could be a focus primarily on sustainable outcomes, and that's the one we're pushing. MAS as a tool to achieve sustainable outcomes is, in our view, the most important element of this whole exercise. And of course, we think we found a link between bundles and the goal of sustainable outcomes, which nobody else has. The second lesson is that data elicitation and bundle design have to be coordinated well if the aspiration is a data-driven bundle design. The point that we're making here is that when you first start, you might not have enough data, so you've got to use other mechanisms. But once you get the data, as we accumulate it on a month-by-month basis, we're able to do that. That's why Sydney is a great example of a well-planned cascade with a pre-trial survey, an initial pay-as-you-go period, and a monthly sequential bundle design, an introduction that no other MAS trial or no MAS product has done to date, as far as we are aware. So this monthly feedback and choose is very innovative and very important, because it enables you to customize, but as you understand personal preferences, what it is that MAS should be offering. And that is what we regard as an important contribution. I'm not going to go through this in any detail. We published a paper on this, but we looked at what were the necessary design criteria and additional features that you would want to look at when you're designing MAS. And of course, we only had 4 bundles and PayG, and just think of the permutations or the combinations that are out there. And it's a real challenge as to whether you've picked the right bundle or not. By getting a 50% take-up, the question is, if we generalize it to the full population, would that be the case? We don't know. I believe that nobody knows. But one thing that is very important is that we have focused on individuals, but that there's real prospects of having MAS as a offering to groups of individuals, be they households or friends, tourism groups, or even employee groups within the single employer. And in a sense, what we've done by working through IEG only, we've got almost an employer-based grouping, but we've looked at it from the point of view of individual participants. And another thing that's worth mentioning is since pre-COVID, and we've moved into post-COVID, or during COVID, if you like, that the monthly assumption may not be appropriate. If people are starting to work from home, they might want to redefine the period in which they subscribe, because they don't want to pay for a service that they don't need on certain days of the week. For example, if they work from home quite a lot. So there's lots of issues, and this diagram, I think, is really important. What we call the designs framework, which I originally developed many years ago in a different context. And if you're interested in this, please read our paper, because it's quite informative. So, like all good researchers, you do qualitative interviews, and we did them at mid-trial and post-trial. And at the mid-trial, which was after we'd really were into February, but certainly not completed it, as I've said to you, we found that 50% of the participants up to the end of February subscribed to a bundle. There's clear interest in bundling beyond page E, which we're absolutely thrilled about, because we believe that bundling is the essence of MAS. But we only have a limited evidence of scalability. We just don't know if we could scale up to a bigger population. Now, I have to say, in our defense, our trial with 100 participants was larger than any other transparent reported trial, not that there are many. So we can't be criticized for having a small number of people, other than it seems to be the way in which trials are being undertaken at this stage. But if they're done carefully, like we've done it, you can still learn a lot. We would love to replicate this, or at least extend it with a larger sample. As I've said, we exceeded WIM, Ubigo, and Mobile Flat. And I should say, sadly, Ubigo 2, which was introduced into Stockholm not long ago, has folded. A failure, I suspect, of COVID. But we're just not seeing the uptake of MAS products at this stage. And please, all of you listening in who are developing travel planning apps, stop calling it MAS. It isn't. So how do we get the best set of bundles? Well, we simply don't know. What other bundles might we consider? At the moment, that's unclear, but we have a framework in which we could test this, and I've suggested some guidance on the criteria you should look at when you're defining bundles. Some of the things that have come out from the participants, that they found that subscription plans offered value for money. They did make the point, though, that the issue of location is important, that modes in the bundle have to be available. And this is an important point, because if you provide modes in a bundle that are not available in the location in which people live, they generally think that they're being ripped off in the subscription price, which says a lot about having multimodal bundles but not stacking it with everything, so that they do not appeal to the market. We do believe that unusual travel patterns is where there's likely to be more take up of MAS initially, but it's unclear. The lack of awareness of details of the subscription plans, providing people feedback all the time throughout the trial was very, very important. That's something that we learned and did post mid of February. But there was the novelty or curiosity factor, as I said, and that was quite important for some people. They were looking for something new, they were looking for something different, and I have to say that there was a strong element of a commitment to sustainability that really was a motivating factor for many of the people. There's nothing wrong with that, because I believe there'll be more people in that market in the long term, and we're not wanting MAS to be scalable to cover the whole of the market, but enough of the market to make it a relevant proposition from a societal outcome perspective, or even a profitability one. So what are some of the other interesting findings? And one thing that we did really well was onboarding. We got such a lot of accolades. There was a lot of one-on-one time and dedication, and let me remind you, that's expensive. Doing this sort of thing was an extremely expensive exercise, so you're going to have some decent financial backup if you want to convert this to a true MAS product, until you're absolutely sure you've got the right product in the market. And those who contributed, and this was a good point, they were able to say they were super proud of the trial and how it constitutes an innovation as the future of transport. So this is a really positive outcome. If the customer matters and they have a view about its innovation success, then that's a positive as far as we're concerned. One of the biggest gripes, though, was better communicating the cost savings. And in the beginning, we were struggling because of the resource implications, but eventually we wrote new programs using R in order to be able to extract all the data very quickly from the apps. One thing we found that the app we were using, and I suspect this applies to many apps, is the enormous inadequacy of the way in which the data is outlaid from the app, dumped in a very uninformative way that you need to be able to restructure it to be able to get any behavioral sense out of it. That is something that app developers, I generally believe, do not do very well. But now we've done that, and we're able to quickly provide data feedback to each individual, which had a definite impact on the way in which they responded to subsequent bundles. An important point, one we didn't know at the beginning, is the exclusion of relevant modes. And it's worth mentioning that when we first set up the trial, Uber did not want Ola in, and later Didi arrived in Australia, but not in the beginning. And it turned out that the discounts we offered on Uber through the bundles were still more expensive than going direct to Ola or Didi. And as a result, you'll find that quite a lot of travel activity still took place outside of the Trippy app and outside of the bundle offer. And it's important that you know what's happening, because you might want to internalize to the bundle, and you really don't know unless you're capturing the full set of travel activity data that an individual is using. And that's why we wanted to identify all their travel, not the travel through the subscription plans, through PayG, through Trippy. So it does raise a question about what role MAS plays in terms of covering all relevant modes and variations. But it's also important to mention that financial rewards are fairly easy to introduce into MAS as long as you have the wherewithal to do it. But we know, and many of us know from travel behavior research, that often it's service levels that are far more important in influencing people's choice of mode than cost savings. And that's something that's extremely difficult to do through MAS, because we can't offer a travel time benefit for, say, public transport if you subscribe through MAS compared to through non-MAS. Maybe there's some way of doing it. We just don't know, but it's an important question, and we're not sure how far financial savings will go to make a big difference to make MAS more than a niche product. I've almost finished. Just some post-trial main feedback, and I should say we're happy to make these slides available later, is that what's really important, that the majority of the people that signed up were frequent users of both public transport and private car. And that's really important, because we're not simply getting people that are already committed to the public modes. Many of the people, in fact, 80% plus of the people that registered interest for the trial had daily access to the private car. And that 17% of the participants reported that the experience of the trial changed their view on car ownership. And what we would hope in the longer term is that people might at least not have a second car, or maybe consider to use their single car only at certain times when they can contribute to reducing traffic congestion. So there definitely is a link here between reduced car ownership, reduced car use, and MAS, but we weren't able to test reduced car use other than an expression of intent by a number of the participants that it's something they would look at. You need a longer trial. In an ideal world, these trials should last for at least 2 to 3 years. And the other thing that was really important is that people signed up because they really wanted to do something, in this case, that they thought would be valuable to their employer, in this case, IAG. And we didn't realize until towards the end that you can map this to the sustainability charters of many employers, or what's known as a social license today, which many of these employers struggle because they don't really need to know what to do about that. And here we have an opportunity where they can say, we are, through encouraging our employers to join MAS, especially if MAS is a product we subscribe to, we can actually contribute to the sustainability charter by demonstrating reduced car use and greater use of public transport in particular. The third point is that many participants, or I say a few, not many, struggle with making the service work for them. And I think the main point there was the challenges with these apps. even our app was not that user-friendly, and many of them are still not very user-friendly. And it took a lot of the effort of the team in the MAS program to help people to understand how they use the apps and to then be able to effectively use them with all the support mechanisms and the offers we gave them through bundles. So this is a real challenge for app developers. Many of them are not user-friendly when it comes to the broad set of roles that they need to play if they are going to be a contributor to the MAS ecosystems. So what have we learned from the Sydney trial? A couple of slides to finish. Well, apart from being privileged to undertake a trial, which unless you do it, you don't know the challenges, I'm not going to go through these in great detail, but the one that I do want to mention, apart from it being fully transparent, is that there is absolutely no evidence during the trial and after the trial, when we've done a lot of thinking about a sustainable business model without subsidy. Now, where this subsidy comes from is an important question. An obvious one might be the public sector, but an alternative might be a non-transport provider through what we call a multi-service, as distinct from a multimodal MAS, whereby you get discounts on retail purchases and other travel-related purchases if you join the MAS product. Having it as a sustainable business model, however, without subsidy, is another way of saying we're not sure that the commercial claims are proven. We see no evidence at the moment of a profitable MAS product. Now, of course, it is very early days, and I don't want to be too much of a skeptic, because in 10 or 20 years' time, we might be wrong. But from what we're seeing globally, what we're reading, what we're discussing, and what this trial has suggested to us, that MAS does not have commercial legs. It has a sustainable business model with subsidy, which we think aligns well with what we think is the major objective, which is societal goals. And we think without the bundle subscriptions, that's likely to not be achievable. We should also suggest that electric cars through a corporate deal should be included in the bundle, because that would give people the great flexibility of the car without the need to purchase it. And of course, by being able to choose a variety of electric cars, depending on whether you need a small car or a large car for the trip you take, can be a very attractive proposition. And it's generally thought, and the WIM Global has even said this, that we've got to return to building the car into the MAS product in a sustainable way if MAS is to have any future. So finally, we need to recognise it's more than an app. Customer service, data analysis, capability marketing, sales and billing is crucial. You need a core team of people with very complementary skills that goes beyond that of the technologically very capable app developers. And you must build trust between the mobility providers, customers, digital platform developers, and so on. And one of the things we learned, if there's not trust between those groups, MAS will fail. We've published a lot of papers, which you can look at in due course. And in a month's time, we will be releasing a full report on the entire trial through our partners, IEG and SCEDCO, with the support of IMU. And if you're still interested in MAS, we published a book last year on it, because we wanted to share the journey without the trial with all those that believe that MAS is an important component of the travel behaviour future. Thank you very much. And just to conclude, that in doing this presentation, I remember our great friend John, who I've always described as an impeccable, gentle person who cared for all and who always found time to listen and encourage. Now it's time for Q&A. Thank you. And I'll pass back to Diana or Brett.
We've had a couple of questions online, but I invite people to write their questions now as well. Firstly, I'd like to thank you, David. We saw the number of slides you had, and very impressed that you got through on time, and even ahead of time. So thank you. Just give people 1 minute to ask questions. So the first one that we had was from Helen. And she was wondering whether the concept of MAS might extend to air transport or marine transport in any way, and whether you explored that issue.
Absolutely, yes. So I think when you look at the definition, the benchmark definition, Helen, it has any spatial context in any mode. So absolutely, and you can imagine a situation where you could travel overseas and take advantage of having a bundle that includes information related to those modes that you've suggested. There should be no limits. It's a matter of how you design the bundles to make them attractive.
Lindsay Oxford asks, you know, with the idea of integrating these services, does the state government or the public transport authorities now begin to extend their offering beyond mass public transport, you know, the buses, the rail? Do they start looking at these other modes and becoming part of the system?
Absolutely. In fact, it's fair to say, and I can refer mainly to Transport for New South Wales and TMR Queensland that we're involved with, that they are very committed to developing an ecosystem that's along the spirits of MAS. Despite us being given a bit of a kick through COVID, that is absolutely an area where they believe they have an important role to play. In fact, already they are talking about the way in which first and last mile needs to be better integrated into the provision of public transport. So yes, I think we have a long way to go. We don't really have effective intermodal planning tools at the moment. And I honestly believe that this has got to be led by government.
Fantastic. A few more from Lindsay, but I'll move down to Mona, who thanks you very much for your interesting presentation, and ask whether smaller cities that don't really have a public transport offering apart from a few buses, I think of Geraldton here in Western Australia, whether MAS could be a part of those systems as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the great thing about it. Potentially and principally, it is spatially agnostic. You can put it wherever you want, but you have to make sure that there is a business case, I don't think it'll be commercial, that will provide a benefit to customers and will enable the suppliers to be able to partner in achieving a truly multimodal experience. Talking to the taxi operators, the Uber operators and the local bus operators seems to be an obvious connection. In fact, it's often been suggested you should start with only a few operators and build up. As you saw, we started with public transport, Uber, taxi and GoGet. Car next door was interested but pulled out at the last minute. So, you know, I think it could be tried anywhere where there's a will, there's a way, but it relies very much on building relationships and trust. But it will need subsidy, in my view. Given that these programs are already subsidised, the big challenge we face is that I doubt whether at the moment state governments want to add even more subsidy to what they're currently doing. And that's a bit of a dilemma because they support the societal goals of MAS, but they seem to have a disconnect between that and what they need to do to make sure MAS can actually happen. That's why multi-service could be a mechanism to generate rewards from other sources. Like, for example, the local shops, the local, any entertainment outlets where they might make some money if you can attract more people by providing better access.
Just a follow-up question from me on that particular point with your data. I noted, you know, say the 50-50 was the one that caught my attention. Perhaps the people that were already using public transport realised that they could get enough discount to, you know, do exactly what they were doing before, and maybe a free Uber ride per month, which made it attractive. Was there any indication that people started to change the way that they travel under these bundles?
It's a good point you raised because we thought that was happening in 50-50, in fact. And it really comes back to which of the bundles were having a positive impact on reducing, say, private car use and emissions, which is our main interest. And we saw no reason why we couldn't identify some benefit, but your point's well taken. If in fact all we're doing is giving existing public transport users and the rideshare users a financial incentive, but we're not doing anything positive to their behavior, you'd have to ask your question, what's the point? So there will be some people that will benefit that way. And if that's all that benefit, it's not going to have any legs. But there were enough people, fortunately, even in 50-50, that had come into that and changed their use of their car. Not many.
And Philip Blake asks online, for the suppliers, was there a desire for them to share their data across the network of suppliers, or did they really want to hold on to just their own information, so to speak?
We insisted that they had to share the data related to the participants in the trial, and they agreed to that. Whether they would want to do that with a larger rollout, it remains a moot point, because one of the criticisms that we're getting is that some of the rideshare companies want to deal directly with the customers and not via a broker or an aggregator, because they feel that puts their customer base at risk. And if at any day the MAS makes a profit, they're very concerned that the majority of the money might end up going to the public transport supplier and not to them. That's a really challenging issue. And it's far too early to say, but there is a lot of skepticism about that in how you join a single MAS product until you're absolutely clear that you're getting your fair share of the rewards. That will have to be very clear if it's to be scalable.
I think Chow here in the audience, do you want to ask a question, Chow, or do you want me to? I'll relay it, thank you. So a little bit similar to my question, now he's thinking the same sort of idea, this sort of self-selection, people who are that sort of person and care about the environment, see this as an avenue for them to continue that behaviour. Did you find that that was present in your data?
No, I agree. I mean, with 100 people, there is some self-selection bias in the sense that they have some reasons to want to join that might not be transferable to a representative sample as such. But I don't think that's an issue, because I think MAS in its early days is going to have those characteristics of participants. So I would not want to be too critical, because I want people to get in and try it and us to learn about it and see what sort of representativeness is missing that we should do something about, if at all. So it's not an issue, but I know the purists might say there's sample selection bias. Yes, there is, but boy, oh boy, I'd sooner have that and be able to learn something to move on. And in time, it's an important issue, not today.
And the talk is really on the future of transport. So there's another technology coming along, that's autonomous vehicles, and how that might sort of interact with the mass market, whether you'll see, you know, are you believing that, you know, we all shed our cars and use autonomous vehicles, and the mass might become an important component for the way of delivering?
Well, first of all, I'm not convinced that autonomous vehicles have desirable societal outcomes. That's a separate issue. I think we're not careful the way they're defined, we could make congestion worse. But I think it's the green fuel solution that's much more attractive in terms of what we can embed in MAS through the electric cars. And in order to be able to demonstrate the value of the alternative fuel vehicles, if we can do it through a corporate sponsored structure, I think it might have a lot of success. Autonomous vehicles in the mix? Well, sure, but I don't think it's high priority, and personally, I don't think it's going to achieve the outcomes that many people think. It's another example, like people who design apps are all excited about the apps. I think AV is a technology excitement. I'm not sure if it's a behaviorally valuable outcome, but I could be wrong, other than the safety benefit. You know, I get criticized for saying that, but I know the excitement often exceeds the value.
That was on behalf of Jerome, sorry. And we had a question from the floor, I think. Caleb. What was it?
I can't hear them.
Okay. Oh, so clearly, you know, the impact of COVID, and I think you raised the issue of working from home. What impact, you know, sort of how does that blend with MAS and particularly perhaps the way we travel?
It's a good point. We've actually published some papers on that in the list, but also when I circulate the slides, there's some stuff at the back which I call rebooting MAS after COVID. And it's a very important question, because basically COVID killed off any success of MAS where it was happening around the world. And in fact, what we saw, the only mode within the MAS set that grew in interest was the bicycle. Everything else basically died off, especially public transport. So that doesn't mean to say that MAS doesn't have a future, because we're coming back. But it's going to be a long time before I think that we're going to see all the modes being attractive. And so it starts to ask the question about which modes should we be prioritizing in post-COVID MAS. to actually give it a future. And that's why I think the private car, even if we can't do electric, through some sort of, I should say not private car, the rental car, especially on the weekends, building that with a generous discount into MAS may be the saviour in the short term, because public transport's not going to do it in the next couple of years in most countries. It's a really important point. It doesn't change the value of MAS, but it does raise the question about the modal mix that might actually have a future to support MAS.
Terrific. And I think we have one more question. We have one more question from Sharon Bierman here in the audience.
If you can hear me, David, can you?
Struggling, I'll try.
Or Dave, Brett can just repeat it for me.
You can come up here. Okay.
So great, the definition for me was brilliant, especially what MAS is not. I think the bundles really stood out for me as critical. I didn't realize how important they were in incentives, and then the link of the bundles to the objectives. So those were for me the three highlights. The question I wanted to ask is around your participants, and the funding for the project. How did it work? What did the project funds provide to your participants? Did they provide did they pay the businesses to provide the discounts, or how did it work? And did that perhaps have any impact on the results that you obtained?
Yes, okay.
You heard all that?
Very quickly, I did hear that, and thank you for the comments, Sharon, about bundles. You're absolutely right. That's the big story we'll be pushing for a long time. As regards this project was funded by iMove through the CRC, with our partners SCEDCO, IEG and the University ITLS, as you know. The discounts, which were substantial, were funded through iMove. They agreed to add an extra value, and the whole project was getting up to close by the time we looked at the dollar value of $1 million. But of course, there's a huge amount of cost put in by IEG and by us that wasn't actually financially built into the final exercise. So if I did a financial assessment of the entire cost of the project, including all those costs that were basically covered by IAG and ITLS, not SCEDCO because they insisted on full payment, then I'd say we're well over the million mark, if not 1.5 million to do a trial. But we did fund the rewards, which by the way were about $50,000 to $100,000. The participants didn't contribute any money.
Yeah. So in that respect, do you think that it's a financial product that could hold its own in the long run? So
it depends on whether it's scalable. It's the scalability challenge. As a niche market product, it's definitely not commercial. I prefer to say at this stage that we have no evidence that it has commercial legs. It's too early. And the business case is only going to be there when you map it into broad sustainability arguments, where you show that the benefit is a welfare benefit. Even though individuals who participate will add value to their own personal, nevertheless, the suppliers will not make any money out of it without a subsidy of some sort. And I have to say that how big is big for it to be commercial, we just don't know. But there's no evidence anywhere in the world at the moment that a fully MAS project is commercial. And if you hear anyone saying that, then you should highly question them for the evidence. It's just not there.
Okay. Well, on behalf of us here at UWA, the people all around Australia and possibly elsewhere in the world, thank you very much, David, for an enlightening talk. Budgets, brokers, and bundles. It's beginning to sound like financial products and sharing risk. But Joanna's got some words here. Yeah, just look, thank you on behalf of Patrick and Business School that sponsored this program. And I also reflect David's sentiments and Joanna's sentiments on Professor Taplin, who had a special place in my life and many others here at the University of Western Australia. So thank you very much, David.
Thank you. I enjoyed it and look forward to being with you at some stage.
Yes, when we
can. And we'll share the material in due course.
Okay. And thank you, everybody. Yeah. I have no idea how to finish this thing now. So, so those people who are online could probably just log off.
I'm enjoying it. Let's continue.
We can see it around. Yeah. So,
No more questions.
well, that question about behavioural change is the one that really intrigues me. Is you know, where's the incentive to change behaviour if it's just a free few public transport trips?
No, well, I think the fact is that the financial incentives did change car use behaviour. If you look at one of the papers just published in Transportation Research Age just this year, well, actually is detailing the actual car use effect. And as I said to you, if you're going to do MAS, you've got to also have a tracking device for all the non-MAS related travel to know if it's changing behaviour. You're absolutely right. But I think we can afford to carry people into MAS if they're just getting a convenience benefit, but we must have those who are generating a societal benefit through changed behaviour. So I think you need a bit of both, you know. I doubt you're going to define MAS where nobody, to avoid somebody just having a free ride and getting a financial benefit by not changing anything. I'm not worried about that.
Intriguing. And the project is wrapping up now, or are you going for another year?
Yes, it is, in the sense that the final report's about to be released, and it'll be on the iMove web. And I'm proud to say it's one of the few full reports that will be on the iMove's web of their project in the next few weeks. But we haven't given up on MAS. I still think somebody else should be doing a trial. There's talk about one in Queensland, but haven't seen it yet. So we've got a long way to go. Maybe you guys in West Australia should be doing a MAS trial.
Well, there you go. There you go. Sharon will deal with that.
And,
look, just in case we're
come in as an advisor.
Yeah, no worries. In case we're holding a private conversation, there's a few people here ready to go. So David, thank you very much. I'll talk to you later.
Right.
Fantastic. Thank
Sign
you.
off. Thanks then. Bye all.
Bye.